So I know everybody here. I've seen all of your faces multiple times, so I don't have to go through quite the spiel that I normally do. But everybody knows me, and for those listening to the recording, I am Liv Stetler, the Watershed Ambassador for the New Jersey Watershed Ambassadors Program. I serve the Watershed Management Area 1, which is the top of the state, Warren County, and the lower part of Sussex. We are a former AmeriCorps program that was defunded federally and is now being administered by the Department of Environmental Protection in New Jersey. We have about 20 to 25 of us at any given time serving in New Jersey. We're supporting environmental education efforts, community initiatives, anything that's going to support our community's resources. And my host agency is the Musconetcong Watershed Association. Those wonderful, wonderful people at the bottom of the watershed. And all of my goals and my pretty pictures. You guys already know what a watershed is. You're experts now. But for those listening at home, a watershed is an area of land where all of the water that falls as snow, rain, or precipitation is going to enter into tributaries, into larger bodies of water, until it eventually reaches the same point. It's usually the lower point of the watershed. It's where all of that water is going to flow naturally, or where man-made structures are forcing the water to flow. But the idea is that it's moving water from one place to another without any mechanics. And everyone lives in a watershed, which is what we're here to talk about tonight, where we live in our watershed and how we can help impact that positively. So we live in the Upper Delaware River watershed. We've got most of Warren, all of Warren County, and then half of Sussex County. We have multiple sub-watersheds within our area. We've got the Musconetcong River, the Peakfest, and the Pollenskill, as well as the Flatbrook, some Delaware tributaries that are smaller, the Pohat, and the Lopatcong Creek. So how are we impacting our watershed? I like to sum this up by saying humans equals development equals pollution. And this is not a bad thing. This is not a good thing. This is just a fact. Where we have people, we have altering of surroundings. So if I was to walk out into a field and in that field, I needed to find food, I needed to find shelter, I needed to find water, I would need to alter that environment in some way. I would need to build a house, which would churn up soil, which would remove grass and roots from the system where I put my house. I would need to find a way to get clean water, and maybe that means I have to irrigate the water in a different way and channel it in a way that's not natural. I have to do something to that area, no matter, even if I'm facing my basic needs, I have to do something to that area that's going to cause disturbance and it's going to cause an impact on the environment. Not all of these impacts are necessarily super horrible. Obviously, like building a house is going to be different than building like a Walmart supercenter. It's going to be a little bit different, but it's not true. What's not true and what's kind of a misconception is that there's nothing that can be done about it. There are ways that we can develop land and impact the environment that can be lessen the negative impacts and kind of mitigate some of those negative impacts. So it's false that nothing can be done about it because there are things to be done about it. It's a fact that we are doing it and that it's happening. And what is also incorrect is that it's somebody else's responsibility to fix it. We as homeowners, we as apartment dwellers, we as people in the community all share a responsibility and a duty to protect our environment and to limit pollution and to slow down stormwater because we all, I like to say, have a piece of the pie. We're all impacting it, maybe some of us less than others. Obviously, we as citizens are different than the impact that like a major corporation is having. But I drive a car, my car leaks oil all the time because every time I patch it up, something else breaks. So I'm having an impact on the pollution that's entering into the waterways. My neighbor doesn't clean up after his dog, but he does all of these other really great things, but he's also contributing to nutrient pollution when he doesn't clean up after his dog. So humans equals development equals pollution. We've got a lot of things that happen all at the same time, and those impacts are affecting our environment. So the main things that we're going to talk about tonight are pollution and stormwater. So I just wanted to get straight first what we're talking about when we talk about pollution and what I mean when I say stormwater. So pollution is the who, what, and where of what's in the environment. So we've got different kinds of pollution, and I think I touched on this a little bit in one of our last lectures, but we've got nutrient pollution, and that is poop, that is fertilizer, that is anything nutrient-based that's being put or accidentally left in the environment. There's chemical, which is basically just any kind of chemical that could be in the environment. It could be oil on the roads, it could be salt that's on the roads. There's a pretty good picture of all of the salt that can be left by our salt trucks, sediment, any kind of dirt or on any suspended solids in the water that's not meant to be there, is a type of pollution. Thermal pollution is not one that we think of very often because it's invisible. I can't see if this water is hot or cold by looking at it, but thermal pollution actually has a huge impact on our plant life and biotic life in our streams and our waterways. So thermal pollution is actually a silent killer. And good old plastic that everybody loves, that we see our McDonald's boxes and everything outside. And there's a difference between point source and non-point source. So most of the time when I talk about pollution diffused through the watershed, we're talking about non-point source pollution. Point source is easy to fix. Yeah, maybe not, I'll back up there. Not easy to fix, easy to find the source of the problem. So if a factory is putting in a very specific chemical in their wastewater and not treating it, and they're dumping it into the stream, if I take a sample downstream, it's a very specific chemical, it's a very specific plant that's doing it. Point source, easy to fix, not easy to fix, I gotta stop saying that. Easy to find the source, maybe easier to solve the problem because we know where it's coming from. Non-point source is a little bit trickier. It's road salt, it's animal poop, it's all of this stuff that's could be coming from anywhere. If I took a sample from my local stream and all of a sudden I've got these really high phosphorus levels, but I'm surrounded by farms, I'm surrounded by communities that are using fertilizers in their gardens, it's a lot harder to find the source of that specific pollutant because it's so diffuse through the watershed. That makes it a lot harder to solve the problem. Stormwater. So when we talk about stormwater, we're talking about stormwater runoff. In a rain event, all of the water that's falling is meant to be sucked up by the ground. And if we lived in what New Jersey used to look like hundreds and hundreds of years ago, it all would. It would all fall to the ground. Most of it would be sucked up by the plant life, by the dirt that's there, by all of that good stuff out in the natural environment. But when we come in and we have our houses and our roads and all these things, we create something called stormwater runoff. And that is when we have impervious surfaces that the water can't seep into. And when the water can't seep into somewhere where it's falling, it's going to go somewhere else. It's going to flow across that surface. It's going to pick stuff up that's on that surface, and it's going to take it with it somewhere else. And when that happens over a really large area, like roofs of factories and warehouses, and then down into the parking lots of those warehouses and factories, and the roads that lead to those warehouses and factories, and all of that water leads to maybe a tiny little stream right next to where they're building that. And that can have a huge impact on that ecosystem. So when we talk about stormwater, we're talking about the increasing frequent heavy rainfall that's happening in New Jersey as a result of climate change. We're having stronger, more severe storms more frequently than we ever have seen in history. So this is becoming more and more of a problem in our communities, especially when we talk about our infrastructure. We're having roads and bridges wash away when they've been here for hundreds of years, just in the last decade. So stormwater runoff is a really big issue. It's a worry because of the volume and the speed of which it's traveling. It's a threat to human life and it's a threat to our infrastructure, but it's also carrying a lot of pollution all at one time. If we just had our little inch rainfall, which is normal for New Jersey, our inch rainfall at a time, it takes some of that pollution, sheds it somewhere else in the watershed, but some of it stays there. Some of it seeps back into the ground. It has a chance to percolate. It doesn't move quite as far. But when we have these rushing, horrible storms, it's pushing a lot of more pollution out into the watershed all at once. So it's a big problem. And I try not to be doom and gloom about it because there's lots of good things that we can do to prevent this, which is why we're here today to talk about that. But this is a really good infographic. I really love this one. I stole this from the city of Wilmer in Delaware. Had this fantastic graphic where we're showing it's running off the roof, it's running off the road, but as it's running off the roof, it's hitting this lawn with fertilizer, it's It's hitting this pet waste corridor where they don't clean up after their pets, and motor oil, anything spilled on the road. And all of that can travel down through a storm drain or just across the road and into a freshwater stream. So it's all of these things added together in that little bit of rain that came off that roof. And then all of the rain that's coming across the surface as well. So this is mainly a presentation that I made a little while ago for homeowners, but I also added in other aspects for people who live in apartments, people who live in the community in general, just so we're a little bit more inclusive. And there's ways for everybody to have an impact, no matter if you own a house, if you own a yard, if you own a condo that doesn't have any outside space. There's a way for everybody to be involved in green infrastructure. So it's true that every property has the potential to implement some of these green infrastructure and sustainable practices, and I'll explain what that means in a second. But it is also true that not every sustainable practice is meant for your specific property. So certain solutions that I'm going to present tonight are not going to work for everybody, and they're not going to work for everybody for a variety of reasons. So you should never feel bad if like something doesn't seem to make sense to you, or something it's not clicking and it doesn't make sense for you to implement that at your home. And that is totally okay. Other things are going to make more sense for where you're at, maybe the geology of your area, like the land conformation of your house. Different things are going to impact what you're able to do, even just willingness. And not only that, but we talked about that earlier. Finances are going to impact that a lot. Some of these green infrastructures, very easy, very cost effective to implement. Other ones, not so much. And they have a greater impact, but they are more expensive. So you have to figure out what's going to work for you and within your means and on your terms and with your motivation. Sometimes these things are going to take a little bit more time and energy. And if you don't have that time and energy to put into it, then it's not worth it. And you should not try to put forward something that you're not going to be able to sustain, both for yourself and for your investment. So for renters, apartment dwellers, and anybody that lives in a van, because a couple of my friends have become van lifers this year, I like to include them. You can still have an impact without owning a house or land. Understanding, step one. If we know that these are problems, if we understand stormwater, and we understand pollution, and we understand the basic functions of a watershed, automatically you're ahead of the game, because if we don't understand it, then we can't fix it. So you are now a source of knowledge for your friends and your family. You can tell your uncle that has this beautiful farm that he should use less fertilizers and at a more appropriate time. So there's all different kinds of things that you'd be able to do. You're going to become an advocate for these different things in your community and in your public. There's a lot of opportunities to get involved with your local parks and your local shade tree commissions and your environmental commissions. There's a ton of ways to get involved, and it can be overwhelming, but taking off pieces as you can be very, very helpful and very impactful in your direct local community. So I broke this down kind of by season because it can get a little overwhelming for me just looking at this huge list of things that you could implement at your house or at your home. So I like to break it up by season because it makes it a little easier. This is the infographic that I was looking for our native species and I couldn't find it, and I finally found it yesterday. I got so excited. So this is a quick one. We're going to skip to plant native plants because this is so exciting. Native plants are so much better at fixing water into the watershed. Their roots go so much deeper than our non-natives that people like to plant because they're ornamental and they're beautiful. But I think our native plants are just as beautiful, and there's so many varieties that you can plant, and they are so much better at reaching down into the ground. So when these guys suck up water, they're just going to be able to put it into the soil at that place. They're just going to be able to reach the soil, the water that's in that small little area. And this also isn't showing the distance that these roots can go. So these roots are reaching down and touching the water table, which makes them drought resistant. So you don't have to water them as often, which is fantastic. But they're also reaching out further. And as they're reaching out, they don't even have to have that much empty space. They can have a lawn or grass or mulch over them, but they're also sucking in that much more water. So natives, I am such a native plant nerd. They are so much better than invasives or non-native plant species. Even if they're not an invasive species, that's a problem in the watershed throughout. they're still not serving as good of a purpose as they could if they were a native species that's designed for this area. So another thing you want to do in the spring is you want to wait to clean out your garden beds until it's at least 50 degrees consistently through the nights especially. A lot of these tips and tricks are going to seem unrelated to stormwater management and pollution control, but there is a connection. And if you ever are confused, you can always just like yell at me and make me stop talking because I can't explain it. The connection parts for this one is protecting the insects. So the more that we protect our insects and our species, which they are facing such declines in our state and in the country really because of the overuse of pesticides and fertilizers, that the more that we can do to help their populations in the wild, in our own homes and local communities, the more that it's going to help the growth of other native species throughout the watershed. The more that we help all of those native plants and those native species and pollinator systems, the better our root systems are going to be, the more solidified our soil is going to be. We're not going to have that erosion and runoff problem. They're also giving a lot of ecosystem services in terms of pollinating our crops. So our food sources are going to be more secure. And if our local food sources are more secure, then we don't have to import as many goods and like food as we would need to over certain months. So it's all really connected because we're so dependent on the health of the environment. So the more we can do to protect it, the better. You're going to get sick of me saying this, but leave the leaves. And I say leave the leaves. There are, I don't like to call them, there's leave the leave people that are way too intense about it. And not everybody wants to leave leaves on their yard. And that is perfectly fine. That is okay. I am not here to judge anyone. No one in the environmental field should be judging anyone because every person is different. Every person has different preferences. And that is what makes this world a wonderful, beautiful place. So if you don't want to leave leaves over your entire yard, that is absolutely fine. But you can move the leaves to like the edge of your yard. Leave them somewhere that's out of sight, out of mind. If you don't have somewhere that's out of sight, out of mind, I think I have it in a different section. I'll look for it later. But you can make a leaf tower out of, I thought the word fencing, to be able to leave them in a place that's okay. Some people will mulch them, and I will say that is serving some purpose because you're still allowing that nutrient to stay intact for things to eat. But a lot of our creatures really depend on the shape of the leaves being left on the ground. So like our caterpillars and our, there's a different word for a caterpillar that's a moth and it's escaping me. My entomology professor is somewhere having a stroke. But they depend on having that leaf form to build their cocoon or build their habitat and overwinter there. So we'll talk more about leaf leaves. We won't exhaust right now. But using natural fertilizers and compost rather than the synthetic chemicals. Sometimes the synthetic chemicals are the only thing that seems to work for certain areas, but it's also a really good idea to get a soil test done. You can do soil tests for actually really cheap through your local Rutgers Cooperative Environmental Experiment. Oh, I have it written down somewhere. Extension. Yes, the weird word I never remember. They're wonderful, wonderful groups, and you can take a sample of your soil and send it to them or drop it off at their office, and they'll test it for you, and they'll tell you exactly what it's missing and exactly what it needs and the amounts, so that it's a source of knowledge that is absolutely incredible. And then you don't have to spend all the money on different fertilizers to figure out what you actually need. They'll tell you, and then you can do it. Any kind of natural compost is going to be better, in my opinion, than synthetic chemicals, just because it's not going to be as far reaching in the environment. It stays where it's supposed to be. These synthetic chemicals can take a while to break down, which is great for the companies because then you use it and it's continuously breaking down in the soil over months and months and months, which is fantastic for your plants. But when that synthetic chemical gets washed into the environment and it's releasing and releasing and releasing, that can be a really big problem if it finds its way into the waterways. So in this spring, we can also start thinking about stormwater when we're planting. So maybe I just did this over the summer or over this past spring with my mom. We looked at the gardens that we had. We knew how much time each of us had to dedicate to it. And we knew it wasn't for how many gardens that we had. So when we replanned this year, we moved some of our gardens to areas that were naturally more wet, lower lying areas in our yard. So we kind of consolidated a little bit. All of our older plants went into this area where they were going to be more easily established in that wetter area. And that is where the stormwater likes to pool and likes to flow out from when we have big storms like that. So the more root structures that we can give that area, the better it's going to be for managing stormwater on our property. There we go. So for summer, which we're finally starting to feel like now, the name of the game is conserving water over the summer. Because maybe we have a summer that we have a ton of water falling all the time, and that becomes more of a management practice. Maybe we have a summer like, was it last year we had that crazy drought for months and months and months where we got like an inch of rain over 3 months? It could be one of those. So conserving water is always important, but using the water that we conserve properly is also very, very important. So drought resistant yards don't need to be watered. I get so frustrated when I drive around and I see everybody's sprinklers on and the governor has been coming out saying we have a drought, please don't use your sprinklers. And if you're looking at everyone else's lawns and everyone else's lawns are dead and yours isn't, there's a reason. And it's probably because you shouldn't be watering your lawn. Sometimes our lawns are meant to go into hibernation because they never really die. They just take in all of those pieces that would be creating seeds and creating growth, and they go dormant. So just because the lawn is yellow does not mean that it's dead. It does not mean that it needs water. It just means that there's a drought and it needs to go dormant for a while. So there are different plants that you can use, different kinds of cover crops that will mimic the look and the feel of a grass lawn, but they're going to be more drought resistant. So they'll retain their color and their consistency over periods of drought. So for those that like that green grass kind of look, there are ways to implement that and to have that, but still be cognizant of the fact that you shouldn't be watering your lawn during periods of drought. Washing cars is something that happens, I feel like, a lot in the summer. We have lots of bird activity. So I know my car gets absolutely hammered every summer. So washing your car is an interesting thing that I never used to think about, because we would just like wash our cars on the lawn and it was fine, wash our cars on our driveway. And we have a gravel driveway, so it infiltrates a little bit, but gravel is still a compacted source, so it's gonna have a bit of a runoff problem. But the best thing you can do to wash your car, especially over the summer months when we have all this rainwater that's moving runoff, is wash your car either at a car wash where they're supposed to handle that effluent in a responsible way and not just dump it into a storm drain, or wash your car on your lawn using a biodegradable chlorine-free soap so that you don't kill your lawn, but all of that soap and all of that product will biodegrade on your lawn in your grass, not wash off from your driveway into the street, into the storm drain, and then go poison some poor little creatures. So there's responsible ways to do it, and there's ways, and I never want to say responsible as in somebody's being irresponsible because they don't know this, because I didn't know this until this year. I never thought about it. I just washed my car and said, we're done. So I never want anybody to feel judged by anything that we're saying or anything that we're talking about, because it's all about knowledge and it's all about sharing this knowledge. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters. So also in the summer is the time where you can consider, do you want to upgrade your green infrastructure situation for the next year? Because summer's a really good time to make those changes or start figuring out how to finance those changes. So when I say a green infrastructure, all that means is just implementing either pieces of machinery or systems in your property or in your yard that are going to have a positive impact on the environment. And most of the time when we're talking about green infrastructure, we're talking about stormwater management. We're talking about taking that stormwater that's falling on your roof, on your yard, keeping it on your property long enough that it has a chance to get into the ground, into the groundwater. So it's not rushing off of your property into somebody else's or into the road where it can cause problems. So if we're talking about upgrades, there's a lot of different things you can do. And I used to have, I don't think it's, no, it's not gonna work. I used to have that scene from Robots where he was like, upgrades, upgrades, upgrades. Now it won't pop up anymore. We're gonna install a rain barrel or two. I'm having a rain barrel workshop this weekend with the Hope Township Environmental Commission. So you're welcome to come out and learn about rain barrels. I will send you the information for that. But rain barrels are really cool. Rain barrels are relatively a cheap piece of infrastructure to implement in your yard. They connect to your downspout from your house. So all of the rainwater from your roof or from like your roof of your shed or something or your barn is going to go into a barrel. There is an overflow spigot. I don't actually see one on this Walmart barrel, so maybe you don't get them from Walmart, but it's supposed to have an overflow that will hook up to a hose. So if that barrel gets filled during a storm event, it's not just dumping the water right next to your house, it's taking it somewhere else. But once this barrel gets filled, you can use that for gardens. You can use it to wash your car. You can use it to flush your toilets if the power goes out. Or you can just open it up and let it slowly seep into the ground. All we're trying to do is slow down that stormwater. Rain barrels are really, really cool. I've been doing a lot of research on rain barrels this month, and they're just so fascinating. You can have like multiple hooked together so that you can have like an overflow system into another barrel. You're not supposed to use them if you have moss killer on your roof, which I didn't even know was a thing, because you can literally poison your entire yard with it. So it's important to research, obviously, before implementing one of these. But these are relatively inexpensive. I think these ones at Walmart you can get for like $50 to $70. And you can make them even cheaper DIY. It doesn't have to be this kind of barrel. If you're not going to use it for food, we're supposed to say you're not supposed to use non-food grade barrels. But if you're not, we're not drinking out of these ever, 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 ever. But if you're not using it on a vegetable garden where you're going to eat the products of the plants, then you don't have to worry about whether it's food grade. I've seen them make trash cans out of them, and they just use them to water flower gardens, and it's awesome. Pervious pavement is also another one. Pervious pavement is a little bit more expensive. This is a really expensive type of pervious pavement because all of these pavers are interconnected. So it has to be put in by somebody who kind of knows what they're doing. But the main idea is that it's still a paved surface in a way, so that you're able to park on it, you're able to drive on it. It's not going to disturb your car in any way. You might have to mow a little bit, but for the most part, it's very low maintenance, and it's going to allow more of that water to seep into the ground where normally we would have a paved parking lot or a paved parking spot. And rain gardens are just the greatest things ever. I don't know if I have another picture of the rain garden, but rain gardens, the main idea, they can be very highly engineered. Chris Abrupta from Rutgers does this fantastic presentation. He's like the expert in green infrastructure in New Jersey. He's the king. And he has rain garden demonstrations and blueprints, and everything is measured out. It's terrifying to me, but they can also be really simple. You could have a natural depression in your yard that you fill in a little bit with sand, a little bit with gravel, and a little bit with soil, and throw some plants in, and you've got a rudimentary rain garden. So it doesn't have to be super complicated, but rain gardens are a great way to naturally use that topography of your house and your property to use that water to give it a place to settle into the ground before it rushes off somewhere else. And in the fall, when we're all sipping pumpkin spice lattes, we can talk about leaving the leaves again. It's such an important, vital piece that I love to harp on, and people get really upset about it, but it really is the most important thing that you can do to preserve insect species and all of our pollinators for literally everything that we depend on them for. These are the leaf towers that I was talking about earlier. These are fantastic. They're so easy. Look how little space that takes up. And it's obviously grade A would be leaving all of the leaves across a wider area. That gives more habitat, that gives more space, that gives more nutrients and more resources for all of these critters that are overwintering. But if that's not a possibility, then that's okay. There are alternatives. We've got leaf towers that you just pile all of the leaves and debris into. You can use sticks and whatever else debris you find in your yard. This one has like pine needles. These look like some sort of deciduous tree. And then you just leave it. And once the springtime comes around, you can use it to mulch your gardens. You can just open them up and spread them out. You can leave them like that all summer if you don't mind the look of them. But they don't have to be all over your yard. Leaving the leaves is a suggestion and a prayer, but it's also amenable. It's not super strict. Another thing we can do in the fall is going to be providing overwintering bee abodes or boxes. So we made little bee abodes last time we were here, that are a little bit more rudimentary. They can be pretty intense. This is a pretty simple one. It's just some sort of, this looks like bamboo or some sort of wood that's got holes in it. What they're gonna do is they're gonna crawl in there in the fall once it starts getting cold, close themselves in over winter. Don't bring it in your house. And then they'll emerge in the spring when it gets warm again. But by giving them this hotel, this little area to overwinter, you're giving them that habitat and that safety that they need to be able to come back for another year and procreate and pollinate and do all the wonderful things we need them to do. So you can cover your garden beds. That's a very, very helpful thing for not only for your plants, but also for everybody that lives in your garden, for all of the snakes and the critters and crawlers that depend on it. Again, leave the leaves. Leaves make great mulch for your garden. Leaving them intact as well, not mulching them up into small pieces, is going to preserve that moisture. They're going to hold moisture in your soil for a longer period of time. And they're just going to be better overall. Once we have rains that come in the fall and rains and snowstorms over the winter, having mulch in your garden of some kind is going to keep that compaction from happening if we have heavy rains or heavy snowstorms. And trying to reduce your lawn can be interesting. I've been harping on my mom for this for 6 years now to reduce our lawn. Reducing the lawn doesn't have to be never mow your lawn again. Everybody talks about these native, natural lawns that look so messy, or it looks like, I had one kid come up to me at a presentation at the very end, and he comes over and he goes, "We did no mow May one time." And I was like, "No mow May? That's awesome. That's so cool." He goes, "Somebody came up and asked if my dad was sick." And I went, "Oh God." It's definitely something that your neighbors are going to see and they might have questions about. Signs are always good if you're going to go the extreme route, to be like, "Hey, we're all okay. We're just leaving this for the pollinators." But it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can have a small strip along the side of your yard that you don't mow super consistently. It doesn't have to be you don't mow it at all the entire year. It could be you mow it every 3 weeks, every 2 weeks. And it doesn't have to be the whole thing. My mother seems to think I want to never use our lawnmower again. And it is her greatest joy mowing the lawn, so she gets very offended. But it's going to use less resources if we don't have to mow as often. It's going to use less. I have a gas burning mower, so it's going to use less gas. It's going to be cheaper for my family. It's going to be better for the environment because we're not using all of that gas all the time. One day I'll get her. And in the winter, when we have all of these wonderful, sometimes really snowy, most times now really not snowy, but cold winters, then we need to use salt. And when we use salt, that salt melts the ice. That salt does not go away. It does not disappear. It melts the ice into water. These puddles and streams in our roadways pour into freshwater streams and make them saltier. We have fresh water in New Jersey in this section. We want it to stay fresh. We don't want salt in our water. So just by using less is usually a good idea for everything in moderation. But the amount of salt that we use most of the times is way more than we need. So for a 20-foot driveway, all you really need is the amount of salt that can fit in like a coffee cup. Like, that's it. Any more than that, and you're wasting your money because it's not having a higher impact. We also tend to salt all the time rather than when the temperature demands it, because if it's under a certain temperature, the salt doesn't work. It just sits there, or it runs off in rain or whatever is happening at that moment, and it doesn't actually get a chance to melt anything. Salt works in a very narrow window of temperature, so you have to make sure that you're using it at that time. Otherwise, you're throwing your money out the window. And also, your salt is going into the streams. So we can use salt appropriately and in small quantities, or we can use alternatives. There's, I wouldn't say any of these are any better than salt overall. They're better for the chemical pollution side. Sand is a sediment. So if we're using sand through the entire township, it's also more expensive because they have to try to clean it up because sand isn't going to disappear like salt is. But sand can be used, it can be a little bit cheaper to use. Like if you're just using it for your sidewalk, you can sweep it up at the end and throw it out and then everything's fine. Go there. Straw is usually a pretty good, I wouldn't say it's a good option. It's an option. That's a little bit better for our streams than salt is. Straw has a tendency to make a bit more of a mess, as does charcoal and ash once it starts getting a little bit mucky or a little less frozen, but they are putting less chemicals into the environment. So I will use a little bit of a mix of all three of these. I tend to use more sand and straw than charcoal and ash just because I hate getting it gets. It's a good option for areas that you only need to walk every once in a while. It's also, these are good alternatives if you have pets. I have many dogs and many cats and many goats. So having either pet safe ice melt that doesn't have as harsh of the chemicals in it or a safer alternative is much better than just the good old bucket of salt that's usually at my back door.
So do you mean like ash, like you could use from your fireplace?
Yes.
Like
Ash from your fireplace. We use like the charcoal and ash that we pull out of our fire pit in the backyard.
Oh, that's what I was gonna say.
You can like crush it up a little bit. Sometimes I'll leave it in bigger pieces and bigger chunks just because it's better for traction. That I'll use for my goat areas just because that's not, they eat everything they're not supposed to eat. So the charcoal and ash usually taste bad enough that they don't want it. And just avoiding piling snow on your plants. I mean, it's usually a good idea to not add pressure and add stress to them. But sometimes that's the only place, that's the best place for you to leave all of that stuff. So trying not to pile all of the snow in one place. If you're going to have to remove it from one area, try to spread it out a little bit so that you're not compacting everything that's under the snow, but also leaving the snow where it's possible. I started doing this in my driveway. We just started doing strips down either side. And as long as it wasn't too high in the middle to reach the bottom of your car, usually my mom would go through and knock off the top layer of the snow. She has 4-wheel drive, which is nice. But if we just do the strips where we need our tires to go, it's a little less, I mean, backbreaking effort because I'm the only one doing it. So that's a little bit better. But the more snow that we leave, the snow is a reflective surface. So the more reflective surface that we have, the more radiation we're knocking back up into the atmosphere and not keeping down here and insulating with this darker roadway. So as much as we can, it's great. I'm not going to say it's going to fix climate change, but it's one little piece in the right direction. And some year-round actions that we can all take. These kind of didn't fit into any real category for seasons, but composting can be done year-round. Composting is actually really good in the winter because it creates this warm environment. My compost bin was like, I want to say it was like between 50 and 60 degrees during that really cold snap that we had. And I would go out there and I'd find all of these creatures like taking shelter in it because it was just that little bit warmer than everything else. So compost is a really great way to limit our food waste. Limiting our food waste limits how much goes into the landfill, limits how much fossil fuels we have to burn to get all of that stuff to the landfill. So any way that we can lessen our throwaways, our trash, is going to impact the environment in a positive way. It's going to be better for our watershed. I've said this enough. Clean up after your pets. I'm sure everyone here cleans up after their pets. This is more of a everybody else in the world needs to get better about this. Compost, blah, blah, blah. We love that. Buying seasonal foods. I used to plan my menus around what I was feeling. And I would be like, I want zucchini. And it's April. So I'm going to go to the store to get zucchini. But that zucchini had to be put on a truck from a warm temperature climate. It had to be shipped all the way here, either by airplane or bus or truck or wherever, however it got here, using fossil fuels. It had to be unpacked at maybe a factory or a warehouse by people that had to drive their cars to that warehouse and that factory. That factory had to be built to accept all of those imports. So buying seasonal and buying local really does have such a lasting impact, not only on our local community economically, but also on our resources, on our natural environmental resources, because they're not as degraded. It's supporting local farms, which support local pollinator communities, and everything is connected. Animal proofing, garbage, and recycling. My neighborhood just got hit by the big, beautiful bear that lives on Bloomsbury Mountain, and everybody woke up very angry. There was garbage everywhere, but I live in a wonderful place where all of my neighbors are very quick to pick up their garbage. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes we live places where stuff gets left when it gets knocked over. So that's always a good idea. Spraying for pests. I added this one yesterday before I sent you this because my father went through and didn't listen to me and sprayed for ants right before it was supposed to rain. And I went, well, guess who now has to hand walk the dogs out front because they can't go in the backyard. Spraying for anything, any kind of chemicals, if you're putting down ant traps, putting out rat poison, whatever needs to be done, it's a necessary tool. We cannot have ants crawling all over your food in the kitchen. We cannot have mice and pests causing havoc on your infrastructure and on your house. That's just not the way that we need to survive. But spraying for them, just like pesticides and fertilizers on a farm, important tools that need to be used appropriately. So don't be like my dad. Check the weather before you spray stuff outside. Use as little as possible. Always use the recommended directions on the product because those were made by manufacturers and scientists that are supposed to be testing this and supposed to, I add, know what's going to be harmful and what's going to minimize the harm. And I always like to tell people to leave their grass clippings on their yard because it's a natural form of fertilizer. If you're worried about killing your yard under the big clumps of grass, you can go out and kick it and then it's okay. And it helps to aerate your lawn so your lawn's not as compacted. It's got a lot of really great impact, but also I'm lazy and I don't like to have to empty the lawnmower bag. So it works for me for sure. So what can we do together? This is a similar slide to what we talked about before. So I don't think we need to harp on anything, but obviously talking to your community members, talking to your family members, spreading this information. You may not own a home, and that's fine. I'm never going to own a home in my entire life, probably, but I can still talk to the people in my house that do own the home, or my family members that are homeowners, or I can go to my environmental commission meetings and talk about different ways that we can help other people who own homes and our public parks and our public spaces to help implement green infrastructure projects when possible to control the stormwater, to control the pollution. We can join our local watershed associations. The MWA is filled with wonderful people doing wonderful things, and they really do need all of the support right now because they are also facing different federal cuts to their funding. So they're wonderful and they do so many amazing things, from education to historical preservation to just studying the water to figure out what the heck is going on in the Musconetcong area. So very important. Embody what you want to see. You gotta practice what you preach, or you're a hypocrite. And I am entirely guilty of being a hypocrite with certain things. But we all have to try to be better, and that's what makes it a fun thing to do. Remain dedicated, but practice tolerance. I harped on this one for both of the other sessions. I don't think we need to go through it again, but everyone's going to have a different opinion. Everyone's going to have different thoughts, and that's okay. That's what makes this wonderful journey exciting and different and brings different ideas, but we know what's right and we know what's wrong. So we have to remember that while also being tolerant of others' feelings. So this is a fun one. I think I exited this one out of the last presentation. So this was just a silly little quiz that I made up for a different presentation, but we can go through it. As there has been an increase in the amount of fertilizer polluting the local river, we'll say the Musconetcong. How can this be reduced? Do we advise residents to water lawns more often? No, never. We advise residents to use less fertilizers on their lawns and only the amount directed on the bottle or bag. There has been recently been a lot of trash on the banks of the town's river in their local park. What can be done to reduce the amount of trash that ends up in the river? Cut down the trees and plants on the banks of the river so that the trash does not get stuck there, so we don't have to see it. That was actually a suggestion that was brought up at an environmental commission meeting I was at. I want to say I'm lying, but that was a painful one. No, we organize cleanups at local parks and we pick up the trash before it gets into the river. You wouldn't think you'd have to tell that to adults. Many town members have been complaining that their water has been contaminated by road salt. What should the town suggest to reduce the amount of road salt pollution? We're not going to advise that residents that live directly near the river do not use road salt because that's just not feasible. That's not realistic. People are going to use road salt because that's the safest opportunity, especially if you live right next to the river where temperatures are usually a little bit lower and you're more likely to freeze. But if we're using less and limiting to when it's necessary, we are definitely lessening the impact and lessening the amount of salt that needs to get dropped. There's also townships that have started implementing different ways of managing the snow on their roads. I know Bethlehem Township has just started doing this, I think in the last year, where they advise residents before the snowstorm that they're going to wait until the snowfall has stopped. If it's safe enough, if it's a safe enough window, they can't leave the roads impassable for too many hours consecutively. But they advise residents before the snowstorm that they are not going to be clearing the roads until X time when the snowstorm is supposed to have stopped. So they're not continuously adding salt and spreading things in the watershed. They're waiting until the snow is at a manageable time to remove it all at once, spread salt one time, and then they're done. And that's a lot better, they're finding, for managing the snow in general. We're not having to run the same trucks over the same area over and over and over again. We're not having to salt the same areas over and over again, which some people are frustrated by because then they're not getting dug out and they're not able to get out of their homes. It's not a perfect system, but neither is poisoning our waterways with tons and tons of road salt. So we got to figure it out. And I'm confident that there are people working on the problem. And I missed another logo. Gosh darn it. But we'll ignore that. Thank you. And does anybody have any questions?